Just play the song, I reckon.
And I should be presenting. And we are live. And so we are ready to...
Mango flowers have come early. Black green is in bloom. Scrub turkey, they'll be coming. Plenty may soon. Let more people talking away. Let you know where you come from. The smile on their faces comes easy. Make you feel you belong. Those banks of a river flow from Goldie down to the sea. Where the rainforest tallest grows. I'm the Yalanji, that's my home. That cottonwood hangs over the water. That water is common cloud. Then fish will be swimming up. Plenty cool now. Those banks of a river flow from Goldie down to the sea. Where the rainforest tallest grows. I'm Yalanji, that's my home. I'm Yalanji, that's my home. More people talking away. Let you know where you come from. The smile on their faces comes easy. Make you feel you belong. The banks of a river flow from Goldie down to the sea. The rainforest tallest grows. I'm Yalanji, that's my home. I'm Yalanji, that's my home. I'm Yalanji, that's my home.
You've been listening to Yalanji, That's My Home, written and performed by John Hartley. Welcome everyone. Welcome to Kuku Yaral, Straight Talk. This is the 4th episode in John Hartley's stories and recollections of family and country tonight. I want to call out to Timothy, Dave, Max. Thanks for joining us. Great to have you here. And good evening, John.
Oh, Yalanji John Gala, Ngayo Kuku Yalanji Bubu, Ngayo Buli Garanjo, Ngayo Bunda Gananda Mumbo Bubu. Hello and welcome to all my friends and relatives. I'm a person from my mother's country in far north Queensland. My name is John Hartley. I'm living in Ghana country, and welcome to you all, David, Max, and Timothy. Thank you for joining.
John, I'm deeply moved by that song. I was putting together some footage for it this afternoon, and we've used it in a short film that we've done before. Tell us about it. Yalanji, that's my home.
Oh, Yalanji, that's my home. Well, it's all in the title, really, I guess. But
tell us about writing it and how that come about.
Well, it's. I guess it's about. I wasn't in country at the time. I was down here, and I was thinking back and thinking about country and being on country, and looking at what I'm talking about in the song is the changes of seasons and the relevant foods that come along in that particular seasons. And there's maybe several seasons in far north Queensland, and I'm also talking about a special place up there I talked about last week, Munjal, which is a sacred mountain we call Gubiri.
Gubiri. Wow.
So I'm talking about how the water comes down, the fresh water comes down and flows into the salt water, and they mix together, different blood, but they can mix together,
Mix together, yeah.
So I was just sort of reminiscing, I guess, when I was writing that song, and maybe longing for country, I guess.
Longing for country, and I mentioned on the just the label, the description below. It comes from an album you called "Poison in the Water."
Yeah.
I'm sure people are going to be asking about that. Steve says, "Hi, John, great song, you rock." So there you go.
Thanks, Steve, and it's good to know there's people that are easy pleased.
So did that ever go out? That album? Did that have a general distribution?
No. I mean, I don't. Whether it's poetry, written word, or songs, I normally I enjoy the process and the writing of and playing them, particularly with friends and things like that. And I know Dave's online tonight, and some years ago we sat down and played music there. I find that quite enjoyable. And but one day get a few people together and we might actually put something out. It's still not beyond doing it, But my language is most probably kindergarten level, essentially. But
this is Yalanji you're talking about.
Yeah, this is Yalanji language, and as you know, we speak a little bit of Western Desert language as well, enough to get us out of trouble or maybe in trouble. But the importance of language, it's really a key and into our country. I think within the language, it contains the whole worldview, how you look at the world, how you relate to each other, to country. There's a whole depth of imagery and worldview encoded in the language, and I think we were fortunate in Yalanji. There's that language survived, but one level of language survive. Of course, there's many levels to Aboriginal language. There's a everyday language, and then there's a sacred language, ceremonial language. There's a particular sign language which has degrees of sacredness and all the rest to it. So it's quite and regaining and regenerating our language is vitally important work in the process of decolonisation, and it's something I would encourage all young Bama
Well,
First Nations to do, and you know, non-Aboriginal people too, because I think it really connects you to country, you know.
Well, music is certainly a way to do that, you know, and you know, the beauty of music and lyrics is you can sing at the level you're capable of.
Yeah.
Whether it's nursery or infant or advanced in a song, it doesn't really make a difference. It's it's beautiful.
Well, you know,
Dave, I see Dave in the comments. He's keen to see some more on the way too. So there's a Carol is talking venues, you know.
So
there's
yeah. Well, you know, it's I don't sing that much these days, you know. But you know, just talking about the song Yalanji, you know, I was talking with my an elder brother of mine, Denny, a week or so ago, you know, and you know, before I do anything, or even these interviews, I will do my best to contact elder family members and ask, are they okay with that? You know, I don't do things just off my own own bat. And you know, we're talking, and I also look for elder brothers in relation to advice and direction and learning our Google, our language. And you know, and he was talking about, you know, the just the word Yalanji. Now, if you take that and you the first four letters, Y-A-L-A, indicates a place, you know. So Yala means a place or an area, and then the N in Yalanji means a living being of this place, you know. And G means this place, you know. And so when you say Kuku Yalanji, you're saying you're speaking a language of the living beings of this place, you know.
Yes, I think that's a concept that comes somewhat difficult to people of Western worldview, because we see language attached to people or groups of people, whereas in the Aboriginal setting, usually language is attached to country and place. To the extent that you might meet someone, you know, say you're speaking Western Desert dialect or language of some form, within a short time you will know the person's country, where they come from, by listening to the conversation and knowing the variations of the language. To me, it's a very sophisticated use of, well, not just sophisticated, but multi-layered uses of language, you know.
Absolutely, and it's right. You know, the language is immediately relevant to the country that that you're in. You know, that you belong to, and of course, you know, ceremonial lines and song lines transfer and go beyond your boundaries of country, and so you get changes, maybe dialectical, but also full language changes. And so most you know, ceremonial leaders, men and women, spoke that were multilingual, you know, spoke up to several full languages, and that's aside from dialectical differences, you know. Yeah, but you know, it's like it'd be like if I come into Kaurna country speaking Kuku Yalanji, that really doesn't mean a great deal, you know. But in the immediate surrounding neighbours, yes, it can mean a lot. Yeah, but you know, I would encourage all those young fellas, men and women, boys and girls, to you know, if you get into your language, and even if it's one or two words, you continue to speak it with pride, and you know, we'll make mistakes, but we'll learn from that, and we'll better it as we go, and hopefully we'll have something good for the future generations, you know.
Yeah. So, John, you speaking of country, you were born off country, and that's really where we're starting tonight's general conversation. And I was wondering, just, you know, having been grown up in Sydney, I think you were, and you know, that's very different from up there in the rainforest country. I'm just wondering if you have recollections of, you know, as a young fella going up there for the, you know, those first few times, or, you know, just paint a picture for us as a young, you know, city boy reconnecting with his ancestral land, his ancestral country. How was that?
Look, it's like you get a light, you know, a light cord, and you stick it in the socket, and boom, everything comes, the light comes on, you know, and that instantaneous sense of connection and belonging. But, you know, growing up in Sydney, yeah, we're up, what's maybe 3,000 miles or something, Sal, from...
Yeah, something like
Boston, something like that. We were... Of course, it's isolating away from country and the bigger extended families, you know. But, you know, we had, my mother had an older sister there at the time, Auntie Beryl, and of course, we used to get a lot of travellers, you know, my older brothers, cousins, uncles, my mother's sisters, who were at the time, you know, in the very early 60s, there was a lot of going on, you know, a lot of organising among the Aboriginal people nationally, you know. It was quite so we had a lot of visitors. So we grew up with some family, but of course not in a permanent sense. And there was always a sense of something something missing, I guess. And it wasn't until around 7 years of age, maybe a little bit older, but certainly not much more than that, was when I my mother first took me to meet her parents. You know,
where were they staying? This was up at the Gorge, was it?
They were up at the Gorge at that time. Yeah. So that was the first. That was the first place I walked into, was Mossman Gorge, and you know, it was still a dirt roads then. You know. It was still early 60s, maybe 64 maybe, or early 65. So but that's when I first met my grandparents, and first began to meet big mob, you know. People came down,
brothers,
uncles. I was fortunate to meet, albeit briefly, all of my well, of course, my grandparents, but all of my mother's elder siblings, briefly, but you know, and all the biggest mob come down from the Gorge, and when they hear you around and you're meeting, and so it was quite and as a young kid you get a bit shy, you know, but I mean, what a, you know, even at that point, you know, it was mind-blowing. And one of the first things on the agenda was to go down and jump in the Gorge, you know.
Get in the water.
Get in the water, yeah. Get in the water and become acquainted with the Gorge, you know. We're told what to do, what not to do, when to get out, and what happens if this changes, and, you know, and then go for it, you know.
I reckon at that age, around 7, it must be like, you know, in the build-up, as you sort of see relatives coming down, and and meeting some people, and that they come from this far off place, it must have had a real mythic sort of character in your mind, I guess. A wonderland. To have all this, or not. What?
Well, what I'm trying to think. I'm going back 53 odd years.
I'm asking for some memories that
there's lots happened.
Might be a bit insecure there. Yeah. Well, you can make up a memory at our age, of course.
I could, but no. No. Well, look, I have it was overwhelming. That's the sense I had,
Right.
It was overwhelming. It was, and then it became a whole new world of, adventure. There was mountains. There was mangoes to pick. There was, all kinds of foods. And I remember my grandfather then had a pineapple patch, and me and the bummer up in the gorge found a back way into the patch where we would,
oh yes,
we'll join
the wildlife. Yeah.
Try out the produce, and then of course we'd go down the gorge, break it open on a rock, eat it, be smothered in pineapple juice, and dive in the water there and wash away all the evidence.
You'll eliminate any traces. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So this is, you're around 7 around the first visit. How did your relationship to country develop then over time?
Oh well, it's I was told and that once you jump into the gorge, it will call you back. And it's been doing that ever since. And I've not faced the pointed end of the stick so much. I've had blunt sticks, but not the pointed end of the sticks. My extended family members in Far North Queensland have been confronted with. Being miles away, somewhat, in some sense, provides a certain barrier to a lot of that. But sorry, David.
What's the just to tell us, you mentioned the pointed stick or the blunt stick. What's?
Oh well, people were still under the Act at that time.
Of course.
And it was.
This is before the referendum, then, or around about the time of.
When was it? 67? Or before the referendum?
Yeah, before, yeah.
But the Act was still invoked in the 70s. In fact, the Act was invoked in the Northern Territory intervention. Yes. So it hasn't really gone away. But family was still subject to that. The racism was overt and just full on, And I remember we walked, because there was no cars. We walked from the gorge into town one time. There was maybe, I don't know, 7 of us, and that time Mossman had an old picture theatre there, the old canvas seats, an old
the old deck chairs.
And I'm standing there with my cousins and brother cousins, and everyone's related. Once you know the name, then we're all related somewhere, somehow. But so I'm standing there with a mob of relations, and we're walking in to the picture theatre, and many we were directed. Well, put it this way: walking in front of me, my relations were directed to the very front of the picture, and in them days, the front, you would be like that.
Yeah, literally. Have a crick in your neck.
Yeah. As I was coming through, and only because of coloration, I was given the privilege of being able to sit, in the comfortable seat. I said no. Of course, I didn't do that. I sat with my family,
Yeah.
But things like that, you know, and that was full on all the time, you know, and the police harassments, all those kinds of things. Yeah.
Well, it hasn't changed a lot of that, has it? Really, in terms of if you've got a dark skin and driving a car, you're going to get pulled up. It's sooner or later.
Very much a reality for a lot of people. Yeah. Well, another time, a young nephew, 2 or 3, we were in a car this time, and a police car was coming forward, and at that time there was no seatbelts in those days.
Yeah, that's right.
My young nephew dived underneath, the front dash, to just at the side of the police car coming towards us. I mean, and you look at that and you go, wow, that's a sort of that was an instinctive reaction.
Yeah.
I remember that clearly. So there were instances like that, but being with family, being in country, and I think, when we don't talk about being on country, we actually talk about being in country.
In country.
In country, because you're in country, you're not on it. Yeah, you're not separated from it. You're part of it. Yeah. But so it was to meet my family and to see, because a young skinny kid looking at this monument, mountains and gorges and bluffs and fast flowing river, and when we went there, we had the house. Then I think the first time we went, the house, I think it was 2 bedrooms, and it was an old tin house with sugar bag doors, and the floor was sort of made out of termite mound that was crushed and then smoothed out, and it comes up really quite nice.
Very hard.
Yeah, the old termite mounds, and the old wood stove. It wasn't until later that they had what we called the new house. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Well, I mean, that was life in the 60s in a lot of places, wasn't it? I mean, we didn't, living in southeast Queensland, we didn't get mains electricity on till, I don't know, sometime late in the late 60s, I guess, mid to late 60s. We had some power there that was sort of a US Army disposal, put together by, pretty handy farmers, doing that stuff. So, a very, very different life. And it's a bit scary sometimes to remember or think about how much things have changed. But back to your story. So you spent time on or in country, and then you'd come back to Sydney for a while, or how did that go over a period of years? Did you get to explore, or to walk country, or?
Oh yeah, there's I went maybe 2 more times along with my mother at a young age. And then when I was 17, I hitchhiked from Sydney. Well, I caught the train, and then I hitchhiked from Cairns all through far north Queensland, and never had money, never had. But I had family, and everywhere I went, there was family, and there was always a feed, and anything that was there was shared, and never had money, and so I travelled around a fair bit, from the ages of 17, and stayed up, and I stayed with family, around in Mareeba, an elder sister of mine in Mariba who looked after me, and I never forgot it till this day. And my nephews, her sons and daughters, stayed out into Holloway's Beach and back down into the gorge and into the Mossman. I was living, hanging around there for a while. Then I'd come back down into Sydney, and it was like, you're stepping through a veil,
Yeah.
Yeah. And very hard to really try and put it all together in my head, really. It was just two different worlds, and then I continued to get up there as often as I can in between, and I eventually took my family up. We stayed up there for maybe a year or so with most of my family, but fortunately my three daughters and my son have all swum in the gorge, have all been introduced to the country, all been swum in the gorge, and been given their bummer names and welcoming into the country. And so I'm happy for that. And I think two of my grandchildren have been there, so I've yet to, hopefully in the next year or so, I'll take if all things being equal, maybe the rest of my grandchildren will get up there to walk in
there as well.
Walk in and swim in their country. Yeah.
Timothy obviously has some recollections of cane toads jumping around in the picture theatre.
I mean, and they were huge too, Timothy. Yeah, and actually they were like you get a tropical rain, and you walk out the next morning or even late at night, when them toads come out, and it's a blanket.
Yeah.
Of, toads and
So we've got the picture there. So just moving along a bit, John. So this was between Sydney and the far north, Queensland. But you left Sydney then, and it's been a while since you've lived in Sydney. So how do you, and you're even further away, I guess. How does that work for you in terms of maintaining connections? And I mean, as you get older, I guess there's other ways of keeping that connection as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I've met all my family, and I wouldn't say I've really sat down with a lot of my family, for long, extended periods of time. But they all know. Most know who I am and where I am. They know that I come and that I go, and so that's established. My family connection and link is established. So I don't. It's not a thing that I sort of run after or sort of look for today. Whereas in the early days it was very important, because I grew up in essentially, my father passed when I was about 7, and so my mother was raising us, and even from the youngest age we were told who we were and where we come from, and where we belong to, and yet you're so far away, but also you're growing up in a very white dominated society,
Well,
and fair skin, and of course it has its own kind of stuff that it creates. So finding your identity, who you are, and what it is, walking into country, meeting family, being with family. Very, very important, for all that.
I'm reminded you're talking about that question of identity and that chilling story you tell in the documentary Two Brothers Walking of being in the classroom and having your identity challenged, even though you know who you are, but how society, or at least a particular, teacher, an authority figure in another culture insists that you are not who you know yourself to be. Just how do you find your way? I mean, I know that becomes part of a life's journey when that happens at such a young age. But can you talk to that for us?
Well, but I never, from what was maybe 9 or 8 or 9, 10 maybe, around those areas. But yeah, like you said, I was in them days, and I'm sure there's people here who would know this textbook, because I was speaking to someone the other day, and it was exactly the same sort of textbook. It had red coats on the front of the front cover, and it was about how the British settled the country, and this tired old story, and how they had to defend it against the savages and things like that, and that language wasn't. That was part of the course in those days.
Yes.
But I remember challenging that, and challenging the teacher, and saying that's untrue. And she said, well, how would you possibly know? And I said, well, I'm Aboriginal. And she said, don't be stupid. Sit down. You're not. You're white. And what that does is just what I learnt from that was racism, to be judged on the basis of skin coloration, regardless of what coloration it is, but to be judged on it. That sort of throws you out. And I remember then I became ashamed, and I remember walking, in front of my mother, and not trying to walk with my mother, and all that, and all these kinds of things, So it sends you into a very deep questioning. But I never, from that day on, I never sat another exam in the school. The only constructive thing I did was, by the time sixth form, and remember, I literally never sat an exam. I just sat there. From that day on, so my education is quite limited in that sense. But the thing, by the time 6th grade, we put our first play, which was featured Aboriginal people. Yeah, and I remember my mother making the laps, and we were sort of directing and producing it. So that was. But other than that, I lost all interest in what the education system was trying to offer.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it was just a result.
It's the way it happens. Yeah. So how does that then, in the song? I'm just thinking of those words in the song where you go back to country and the ancestors. You find a way of making connection again, and I'm particularly interested in the way how you express that in your music and in your storytelling and the way you tell that. And can you? And I think it's not only is it very insightful, but it's of great value, not just for people who have within your generation experienced that, but I think it's of great value for all of us, really, who have lost a connection to country, to Mother Earth, you know. So can you just sort of speak to that, the sitting down in country, and there was that image there in of you and your two brothers there at the gorge. I'm not sure whether you saw that as the song was playing.
It was one nephew, one brother. Yeah,
a nephew and a brother. So just can you talk to that process of finding a way of reconnecting to who you are through your country, through your ancestors that are in country?
Big question, but I think you don't ever lose that. What happens? It becomes buried into some part of you. Yeah. Because I think it's there, and as I said, it's encouraged in your living environment, and also it's a very natural thing. But when you're confronted, and whilst it may not seem traumatic for some, the fact that you can be questioned at a young age on identity on the basis of coloration, so immediately takes away any legitimacy and sense of who you are. It's sort of cuts your roots, so to speak. But it's never gone. It gets covered up with things trying to then fill in the hole or the void that leaves. Yeah.
Yes.
And that may, it can take lots of forms. It can be expressed angrily, violently. It can be expressed, through alcohol, drug abuse, all kinds of different ways, suicidal behaviours, all kinds of different ways. Yeah. So you go through a lot of different things in trying to get back, I guess, because you know that something's missing, but you're just really not quite sure what that is. And until you walk into country and you sit down and, you start to listen to what's going on around you, and then the country starts to speak to you if you listen. Yeah. But it's also about family, and I know, that walking up to me and say, this is who you are. You are Garanjal, and how that name comes about, why that name, and the relevance of that name. So, and also, this thing of identity and the impacts and effects of colonization on a bigger scale. The language, your family systems, your ceremonial relationships, your relationships to your country, and all these kinds of things are ripped from you, and through this process of colonization, and to regain to get that then requires a process of decolonization, of questioning what is being put out there as truths, or factual history.
So Max is asking there, and related to this, he's saying, well, I think you've answered in part, but what do you draw on to inspire or sustain you, or at those times when when that great dislocation, that wound, it's a spiritual wound that one carries, and I mean that can come. I mean it can come in many ways to many people, and it's not always race related, but that is the big story for our country. What do you draw on to inspire and sustain you, and can you do it alone, or do you need family, or
you look. I think you make a choice. Yes, that's a choice you make alone, but most certainly you can't do it without family, without friends, without people in your community, really. We're interdependent, when this idea of rugged individualism is really the myth, of of nation building, and all that kind of thing. But I think initially you Max, for me, you sort of spin around out there for a little while until you have to find your center, and you may be the lucky one, and you find that many of my too many of my family relations didn't. So what sustains me is okay. There's this. It's when I spoke in the early episodes about Kuku Yalanji and the guerrilla wars that were going on during the Palmer River Gold Rush, just briefly. Now, the Kuku Yalanji ancestors made a deliberate choice to lay down their hunting implements, their spears and their nulla, so that those that were left would continue on. And that was only a handful of Kuku Yalanji families, as I've mentioned before. And that's what I look at. That's what inspires me. That's what gives me courage. That they fought in protection of their country way of life and their families with hunting implements against rifles and Gatling guns and poison, things like that. It was mass murder and slaughter, really. But because the necessity to continue to go on, was the impulse. And so they laid it down and came into town, so to speak. So that kind of thing does. Personally, I mean, I've found for me in being able to release a lot of that stuff was through the practice of Tai Chi Chuan, through the practice of Tai Chi. Yeah, because it allowed me to start to focus, to relax, to center myself, to start releasing these build-up tensions and things like that. I found the practice of Tai Chi Chuan very, very therapeutic, very, very healing, but also ceremonial, and traditional processes that I've been involved in here, but also in overseas as well. Yeah, the importance of those in strengthening yourself and your family and your community, very, very important. Yeah.
Well, John, we've been going just 50 minutes, so I know that tonight you have some poetry or some spoken word that you were going to read for us or recite for us. It was just before we go to do that. Does anyone have any other questions? Or, I mean, we've sort of billed this as the fourth and the final part of the episode of this mini series, but in fact we're going to continue this Sunday at 7 next week and into the future. So the question that Carol asked there about the storyboards, and John, you've also mentioned earlier about the decolonisation process. I think that's probably the place where we need to go and have some discussion about how to do that. How does that happen, and why do we? Not so much why, but how come we need to do that, and make that part of the narrative that we know and use. So if there's anyone else who has any questions, thanks for the participation tonight. That's fantastic. Thank you, Dave. He says, great to hear that the story and conversation continues. Well, we'd like you to keep commenting and being involved in this too, Dave. Thank you for being part of it. It's an important conversation. So if there's no other actual questions, I know there's a little bit of a time lag between when we broadcast and when you receive it, but it looks as if I'll hand it back to you, John. If there's anything that you want to talk about your early days, we certainly can come back to it another time, but there's also an opportunity now before you then share your other words with us.
Sure. Look, thanks, David, for the opportunity, and for those of you who have tuned in. Sincerely, it means a lot for me to know that people have taken the time to tune in. I've tried as best I can to give broad brushstrokes of things from my perspective and my family's history as we went along. Of course, we could be here for quite some time, but I hope you have found our get together at 7 interesting and perhaps a little thought provoking. That would be good. David, I always say to people, in our law, LAW, in Burma law, there are 3 things that remain unmoved by time and tide, and it remains throughout this continent, and we call them the 3 stones. And in our law, the number 1 thing is you speak the truth, and number 2 is that we care and share for our people, and number 3 that this country is our country. And I just want to add that if you're born in this country, and it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, but if you're born in this country, then you're born into the law of this country. It's your taproot, and it belongs to you. And we're seeing the disappearance of Aboriginal languages, of Aboriginal homelands. We have to keep in mind that homelands are not just things. Someone puts a house there. It actually are they're places of very high significance ceremonially for Aboriginal people. Are still under threat. And people ask, well, what's the answer to all this? And the thing is that we don't know the answer because we're still in the midst of a process that commenced 200 years ago, 230 odd years ago. So we're still in the midst of that very same processes. Though the paperwork has changed, the language has changed, the intent of it's said that people only vested in this only wants one thing, and that's everything. And they won't get that until the Aboriginal people are off their lands and attempts to assimilate our people continue. It's a big country. We can all live here peacefully together. It doesn't need that kind of carry on. But what I want to get the richness, the tapestry of the languages that go throughout the country, the stories that go throughout the country, belong to everyone who's in this country. It's part of your heritage, you know. And where if there's a opportunity that you can protect it or speak up for, or just to simply gain knowledge of exactly what's happening, then I would only encourage you to do so, you know. And that would be good, you know.
And you know, we've spoken about it, John. I see Felicity's comment here. Hi, Felicity. Great to have you here. She says she works with kids who are on their journey to identity and connection as well. And you know, we really have a desire to be of assistance or to do what we can there as well. And if your kids that you're working with, if they have questions, if there's something that you know that we can put together, we would like to do that. And I guess this goes out to everyone in a sense that yeah, we are in the middle of something and don't have the answers. We're developing the answers. We're in discovery, really, for those sorts of things. But you know, we certainly invite you to be part of that, and to be part of that by, you know, I mean, we've talked about putting some package together or whatever that might be, or even more simply, you know, a conversation that answers questions that you may have that we might do on video, if that's of use to you.
That's right. And you know, that's the point. We don't know the answers, but we do know what we don't want. We know that.
Yes. Yes. We know what's not an answer. Yeah.
We want the pillaging of people and country to stop. And
yes.
And you know, and I don't ask too much of. You know, I think the one thing we want really is simply for those who proclaim authority to simply speak the truth.
The truth.
And I guess I've just sort of done a lead into my written piece, but yeah.
Well, let's continue there then.
So thank you all again for tuning in. And this is a bit of a John Lennon-ish inspired. It's imagine if, and I'll read it because my memory, it's only not too old. Imagine if parents only ever told it, if the education system only ever taught it, if historians only ever documented it, if intellectuals actually experienced it, if politicians only ever acted on it, if only the justice system only ever upheld it. What would truth say about your country? So with that, thank you again, and look forward to catching up.
Well, thank you very much, John Hartley. It's great talking with you as always. Now, as a thank you for you all being part of our conversation here, I've just put a link in the chat box there, and that's a link to the video that we did, the documentary Two Brothers Walking. We've got that for $1 rental in the shop at that link at the moment. We hope you enjoy it if you haven't seen it before, and so I think it's $1 US, so it might be $1.20, fluctuates by day, but take advantage of that. If we'd love you to have a look at that if you would like. So, yes, John.
No, I was going to say thanks, Tim, and all on the panel.
Yes, absolutely. So, thanks for the people who signed on at the registration form. That's really useful for us to have a name that comes up in the chat box. It really makes us know. It lets us know that we're talking to real people, and that that what we're attempting is being heard by people, and your comments really are great to let us know whether we're on track or not. And also for the people who have come across from the Facebook link, you come up in the chat box as a guest, so we don't actually know your name, but I can see that there's quite a number who have come over from Facebook as well. So thanks for that. We've had quite an interesting 4 sessions here, getting to know the limits of the technology, and if you have any feedback on that as well, we're pretty good listeners in our advancing years. So send it send it to us. We'd like to know what you think.
We're actually deaf. We just look like we're listening. And thanks, Dave. I'll catch up with you. Keep fiddling, mate.
Yeah, we're fiddling, and yeah.
Oh, Dave Pennington. Sorry, Dave. I was talking to Dave Pennington.
Oh, no, the other Dave. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. Another fiddler.
The fiddler.
The fiddler, I should say. Yeah. So yes. Thanks very much. We look forward to seeing you next week. We will send out a notice during the week, as usual, giving you a link to follow, and a little idea on what the topic would be. And what we'd like to do, as I mentioned earlier, is for you to become part of the conversation as much as you like through your comments and feedback. We value that. So have a good night, and wherever you may be, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Yes, the Carol just mentioned that the promotion is only applicable to purchase made in US dollars. If you are on PayPal, that should be okay. If it isn't, I think it comes up in US dollars, but it will actually take any currency. It does its own conversion. If there's any problems with that, send me a message on the Facebook page. We read all the comments, and we respond to them. So if you aren't able to get that, I'll make sure that you can, one way or another. Thanks, Steve, for your encouragement about the tech gremlins. We're feeling that we're on top of it, at least tonight. It may change from time to time, and it's not chicken counting time yet. Okay. Good night, all. Great seeing you. Cheers.
Good night.